Okay, let's start with a question that, if you think about it, defines our era a bit. But why do we feel we can trust more a creator who speaks alone in his room in front of a webcam, rather than an entire news show with a studio and dozens of professionals? Well, the answer takes us on a crazy journey, a little in our head and a little in the media world. So let's immediately get to the heart of this modern question of trust. What we are living is a beautiful and good paradox, a real short circuit between what the numbers, the cold data tell us, and what we feel in our gut. Let's think for a moment, seriously, what makes that creator, perhaps with the imperfect lights and his informal way of speaking, closer to us than an impeccable host in a studio that costs millions? The question revolves around how we perceive things. It is a feeling of closeness, of authenticity. The creator does not seem like an authority descended from above. He seems like a person. And here things get really, really interesting. Why? The numbers. Well, the numbers seem to tell a whole other story. Let's take a look at this graph. On the one hand, in Italy, trust in traditional media is still very solid, at 65.6%. But on the other hand, and here's the point, only a tiny 5% have total blind trust in influencers. But then how is that possible? How can there be such a gulf between data and our feelings? Here, the key to solving the mystery is all here. It's not a matter of data. It's a matter of sensations. It's not a rational analysis. It's a visceral thing. It's the huge difference between emotional trust, which makes us feel connected, and objective verification, which tells us whether a source is really trustworthy or not. And to understand this connection, we have to go a little deeper. We have to explore the psychology behind it. In short, let's try to understand what goes on in our brain when we are there, in front of the screen. And here is a fundamental concept. The shareholder relationship seems like a big word, but in reality, it is something we experience every day. And that one-way psychological bond that makes us feel like we know a person very well that we've never met. Let's think carefully about our favorite creed. Maybe we know the cat's name, the home decor, his little frustrations. Our brain connects the dots and voila, turns him into a friend. And this sentence sums it all up perfectly. You trust someone who seems like a friend, even if the bond is one way. Exactly so. We trust those we perceive as friends, even if that friendship only exists in our heads. This familiarity built video after video becomes a very powerful engine of trust. And that brings us to another crucial difference. TV is a vertical medium. There is an authority at the top talking and a passive audience at the bottom listening. Creators, on the other hand, are horizontal. They create a dialogue, a relationship between peers. You are no longer mere spectators, but you become a community of a tribe. Okay, now let's change perspective. 6 creators seem so close to us. Why does television seem increasingly distant, almost foreign? Well, the reasons are many and they add up. TV is often perceived as cold, artificial, uses a formal language that does not create a bridge but a wall. And then there is that increasingly strong suspicion that there are political or corporate interests behind it. Let's add a format that repeat themselves tirelessly, and the picture is complete. And this data, look, is a very loud alarm bell. Italy ranks 49th in the world for press freedom, the worst in all of Western Europe. It is obvious that when the perception of independence of information collapses, so does people's trust. And be careful, because it is not just an Italian problem. On the contrary, it is a global wave. In the United States, trust in the media has plummeted to an all-time low of just 28%. This is a picture of a deep, very deep rift between the institutions of information and the public. Well, and this brings us right to the turning point, to a fundamental question, perhaps the most important of all: trust versus truth. The trust we feel is necessarily the same thing as the truth of the facts. Let us say it even more directly. The fact that a creator seems honest, nice, reliable, means automatically that his information is always correct and verified. The answer we give as an audience is smarter than you might think. If we go back to the data, we see that only that 5% trust blindly, the vast majority, 69%, trust partially, and a good 26% do not trust at all. This tells us something very important. Yes, there is an emotional connection, but a part of us remains vigilant, critical, and we do well to be vigilant because the risks are real. They range from misinformation, perhaps even involuntary, to excessive simplifications. And then there is the total absence of editorial control, of an editorial team that verifies. Not to mention the big theme of hidden sponsorships and the tendency to create divisions just to generate reactions. Of all these risks, there is one that breaks the trust pact more than any other: undeclared advertising. 80% of people feel betrayed, made fun of when they discover it, and that's when that magnificent castle of trust built on transparency collapses. And so we come to the conclusion: this is not a battle between old and new, between TV and creators. No, this is simply the photograph of the new complex media reality in which we are immersed every day. This table sums up the picture perfectly. Creators win hands down on emotional trust over interaction. TV, although it seems distant, in theory offers more guarantees of control over the facts. I am. Two worlds with languages and pacts with the public that are radically different. What about the future? The future is inevitably hybrid. We already see a mix: traditional media trying to use more direct languages, creators raising the level of their productions to make them seem real television shows. The real challenge, then, is ours, to learn to navigate this ecosystem. The key point, then, is not to choose for Citifari Sere Pro TV or Pro Creator. It makes no sense. It's about understanding the rules of the game, the strengths and weaknesses of both, in order to be able to distinguish the authoritative voices. Simple, huge background noise. Ultimately, the question we have to ask ourselves is no longer do I watch TVO, I follow creators. The real big question of our time is another. Who are we giving the power to tell us about the world? An answer today requires more critical thinking than ever.